news Friday morning, afternoon, whatever time zone we're in. It is CMLS and Council of Multiple Listing Services MLS Matters. Today we are going to be talking about a couple of the upcoming MLS policies, but before we dig into that, I would like to just run through a couple of things that CMLS is currently doing while we're letting everybody in, seeing our numbers, everybody joining us. So first, let's start with, hello, I'm Danae Evans, the CEO of CMLS, and thank you so much for joining us. But first, let's talk about CMLS is in the know. I'm so excited about this. I hope that you've all had a chance to see this. It is our consumer focused. We did making the market work before, but this is our consumer focused one. How can we share the value of the MLS to the consumer in the most non-industry speak way possible? So if you get there and you say, but it doesn't say all these things, that was on purpose. It is how we can say it to the consumer. That is the website you can go to. And Kelly, if you will go to the next slide and show, I'd like to just sneak peek a little bit of what everybody is using. Highlight a couple of those cool things. Here's a Metro List, has a couple things out. You'll see on there, multiple listing service makes the real estate market work and helps keep sellers and buyers in the know. There you can see the little addition over there in their homepage. So thank you, Metro List, for launching that. The next one, I think we've got Stellar on there. So Mary Jo, you're with us today. Thank you. The next one is Stellar's pages and some of their social media stuff. I love the one on the right here, a letter that went out to their members saying why they were doing this. And one of the goals with this was that we are putting the agent and the broker, the realtor, as the hero in this story. So you can see the letter there on the right as to how it's helping to add value to your members. So I hope you all take advantage of that. The website is there. Own it, make it your own, and get it out there. So appreciate you all and the support on this, and you'll continue to hear more from us on this and how you can engage and use it. So thank you very much. Our next one is, we're going to show about our resources that we have done for you over this last 12, well, it hasn't been 12 months yet, but since the beginning of the year. Please get in there and look at the resources, the data access marketing guide. We're going to talk about that actually in a little bit. Partnering or working with your brokers during COVID. There's some great questions. How can you better support them? So get in there and look at that. That is on our website. And then I think from there, we can jump into our conversation today. Yes. With that, I would like to take a minute and have our panelists introduce themselves. So if we could kick that off, each of you just take a minute and say your name and your organization that you're with. And if we can kick it off, Nicole, would you start us off today?
Thank you, Danae, for having me. I am Nicole Murray. I am the MLS Association exec for the Pocono Mountains Association of Realtors in Pennsylvania. So we've got probably about 1,100 subscribers.
Excellent. And Nicole, you were on the MLS Standards Work Group.
Yes, correct.
Great. Thank you for joining us. All right. Greg.
Greg Zadell from Firestone, Colorado. I'm a broker, been a broker here since 1980 and served in various capacities at NAR and MLS for a couple of decades or so now. And currently I'm the chair of the advisory board for this year and will be for next year as well. And a past member of the MLS, or past chair of the MLS committee, and then also on the task force that we had for standards, and just been involved in a lot of stuff.
You've been busy.
Yes.
Thank you. So you were on you're on emerging issues as well as the standards group. So you're going to talk to us a little on both sides of those. Thank you. All right. Art.
Hello, everyone. My name is Art Carter, the CEO of California Regional Multiple Listing Service. And this year I had the pleasure of serving on both the advisory board, the Emerging Issues Advisory Board, and the MLS Standards Work Group, which was the hardest working committee that I've been on at NAR in 20 plus years.
I will second that. Awesome. Mary Jo.
Hi, Mary Jo Cowan, CEO for Stellar MLS in Florida. And I wasn't on either work group, but I guess I'm the outside opinionator today. But I appreciate here. I'm excited. And I am excited to say I will be the CMLS representative on the Emerging Issues group next year. So I'm very excited to be joining that group.
Thank you. And you are here as one of the CMLS directors and somebody who's been very involved with MLS standards and best practices over a long time. So you have a few credentials there. And Chris, if you will close it out, because then you're going to get our first question of the day.
Very good. Good morning. I'm Chris Carrillo, CEO of Metro MLS in the great state of Wisconsin. Appreciate being on here this morning. I happen to be lucky enough to be serving as co-chair of the MLS Standards Work Group this year, with the other co-chair being John Coyle, who cannot join us today, but excited to talk to you about the recommendations we've come up with so far, talk about the process and where we go from here.
And that is the perfect segue. If you would kind of kick us off, I printed out an old agenda from that work group. And so would you just take a minute or two and tell us what was the purpose of that group as being the co-chair? When did it start? And just kind of give everybody a little bit of history of that before we jump into what were the results of it? Where did we get to on recommendations? So give us a little history on that.
Absolutely. So I will echo what Art said. 2020 has been an odd year, but it has allowed us to really focus in on some of the work that we'll be discussing. And so there have been a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, and hopefully that should make everybody feel a little bit better in the fact that we didn't just rush to some of these recommendations. These have been vetted. We continue to vet them with the entire purpose to be transparent about that. So if we go back to the beginning, this group was appointed the beginning of 2020 to really tackle this large nebulous issue of, if NAR is going to get behind standards within the MLS community, what should those standards be? This group is comprised of equal parts, and that is of equal parts of MLS executives, of diversity of size and geography across the country, as well as brokers, some big and some medium and some small. And again, that's from a diversity standpoint, all over the geography of the United States. And so we started off talking about what kind of standards we should really be talking about, knowing that if you really think about the different areas that MLS focuses on, I mean, there's so much that we could focus on, right? And we feel good that that the 8 recommendations that we're coming to in phase 1 are really a culmination of some of this discussion, knowing that this is simply the beginning. Obviously, look forward to the conversation today, but the process, we went through a process. Katie Johnson came in at the beginning of that and said, I want to take you through an exercise called Brew. Without getting into the details of that, let's envision a world where there is no organized real estate. What do consumers and what do practitioners need from the multiple listing service to be able to do their job? And that was really it. So we went through and did a good job, I think, identifying all the different stakeholders in the MLS. That exercise was interesting because we identified anywhere 12 to 15 stakeholders at that point and narrowed it down, and they culminated in the recommendations that we have here. So again, hardworking group, sometimes meeting twice a week at hours at a pop. I see Rodney Gancho's on here and Renee Galicia. Obviously, they've been our liaisons in helping really drive this process, and that's where we're at today. That's a little bit of the background.
Excellent. Thank you.
If I could give just a little more background on that. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Please share.
Jump in, but over the last several years at the advisory board level, we've had a lot of questions that have come from mostly from brokers and dealing in multiple markets. And so a lot of a theme, if you look back at what's been done, has been to make it so that brokers can operate better across multiple markets. And that's where a lot of these ideas that came forward that needed to become standards or need to be considered as standards came from. So that, and I saw Mary Jo answered a question there. That was a work group formed by the MLS committee. And so that work group reports back to the advisory board, first of all, so that can be focused in. And then that advisory board takes things forward to the NAR MLS committee, which would then go to the board of directors for approval if the MLS committee moves it forward.
And Greg, if I could, I'll just put this out there before anybody can jump to any kind of conclusion. There are over 600 MLSs in the country. The goal of this is to not get into the quantity of MLS. It's about raising the quality of the MLS. That is what Greg said, ensuring the consistency of service. If you're a broker in multiple markets or just one, there should be a base level of service that brokers, participants should expect from their MLS. That's the entire purpose of this work group, is about quality of MLS and not quantity.
Right.
I think that's a great point, Chris, and there was a lot of discussion around that. There was the question of if it was a CMLS work group or an NAR one. It was an NAR work group, but CMLS did have appointments to it. So there was the individuals who've been working on our best practices documents over the last year that were appointed to that work group. So did participate in it. I'd like to go to Nicole, and Nicole, if you could just talk about some of the processes and some of the conversations of how we narrowed it down to those recommendations. And I say I was on those calls. I was not officially a member of that committee, but I was able to participate and hear the conversations. And as Art and Greg said, it was a lot of work. And definitely some great conversations. So Nicole, would you take a minute and just sort of talk about what you saw as the process and some of the conversations to get it whittled down in the.
There were, I mean, the conversations that we had throughout the process were just so interesting to me. You know, this is what, my 5th year as an executive with an MLS, and I do come from a smaller MLS. So just trying to make sure that all the industry stakeholders were being thought about as we're going through this process, and like, all right, how are we going to be able to get the resources available to help move things forward? And it's just, it was a ton of dialogue, conversations back and forth. Well, what about this? What about that? Every single thing I could have possibly thought about, and things that I didn't even know were really things were part of these conversations. It was a great group to work with. You know, definitely was honored to be a part of this.
Great. Art, will you talk a little bit about the diversity and the makeup of the group and why you know, was it represented, and how were the voices brought together, and how do those conversations go between, you know, we did have MLS exec and broker and agent and whatnot. Talk a little bit of how that all went.
Yeah, as you stated, there was, I think, a pretty good cross section, not just brokers, but large brokers, small brokers, agents who brought a unique perspective to the table, small and large MLSs, medium sized. I think we had a good representative group. And as Chris said, I think the biggest difficulty for the group in and of itself was everybody came in philosophically at a different place. And the first thing that we really had to do was to boil down what it was that we wanted to get out of the group and philosophically get us all in the same place. And we did a number of different exercises. As I said, you know, I don't know, Greg, Chris, Nicole, 40, 60 hours of work. And that might not even include all of the prep work that we did. So there were a lot of phone calls. We did a phone call every week for months on end. And I think that once we got everybody in a place where mentally that they understood what it was that we were doing, and we all could get some buy-in in the direction that we were going, I think things moved a lot more quickly after that. But it was a task getting us all in the same place philosophically.
And if I could, Art, I have to really hammer this home. As much as MLS executives, we understand and we feel the pain based on our own experiences and our own job and our own markets to come, and that where the different philosophical approaches comes. I almost think that MLS is a verb. So what does that mean? To MLS. That's probably a little different for each of us. And that's the philosophical difference that we had to work through to get to this base understanding so we could actually talk about in a meaningful way standards. At that point, I don't think that there's a duo that continues to push the industry forward more so within this policy area, especially, than Renee Galicia and Rodney Gancho. These guys really continue to push us forward, because think about it. What we all have in common on this call is if you have a question on policy, who do you call? it's typically one of those two people. And so they hear it, they understand the pain points, and they were just in a very important part of this group, and they will continue to be, obviously, as we go forward.
Yes, they were amazing on this and contributing to the conversation and just providing the information. Renee and Rodney, always appreciate working with them. Excellent. So thank you for calling that out, Chris. Mary Jo, next, I want to bring the question to you. And I will say that since I've 6 months or 6 years, 6 months, I'm having issues with time frames today. But 6 years, right? But I will be 6 years this December. And I feel like I've heard this conversation that whole time about NAR having standards for MLSs. That has been a touchy subject, I would just say, is that no one's been really excited about it. I'll describe it that way. And so here we are with some recommendations coming about some standards for MLSs, and CMLS was involved in that. And so in reading through what those recommendations are and kind of what that conversation has been over the years, what are you seeing as the value of these coming out? And if you're looking at them, and where Chris talks about quality of the MLS, not necessarily quantity or whatnot, but about just the service level of MLSs. So I'd love to hear your take on it and this conversation as it's evolved over the years and where we're at today with these recommendations.
You know, it's funny because this was a conversation that nobody wanted to have for very many years. Like we don't need anybody telling us how to run our business, you know, how to do this and that. And then, but I think what has evolved from this is in the industry in general is that as MLS executives and we are much more clear on who our customer is, who the broker being our customer. And that it's important for us to be taking a look at how we can consistently, you know, like what Greg was referring to earlier, how can we serve them on a consistent basis? So what I see in this phase one, I think is a great start. I think it makes it really clear that it's not getting down into the day-to-day management of an MLS and how you have to do things, but yet providing that level of some level of consistency in the service to our broker participants. So I think it's a good start. And I don't think that it's anything to be feared at this point anymore. I think we all realize that we serve diverse markets, but we want to give our brokers the best experience we can. So it's good.
I really like that description. It does boil down to service levels, right? How can we just really up as an industry, as a collective community of MLSs, how can we better serve our customers? And I think that's the messaging. And I feel like that was a lot of the conversations that did happen in there, which I do want to just point out one of the recommendations that is in there was a resource that CMLS put out earlier in the year about having the contact information. So I think, Kelly, if we can put that slide up, I just want to make sure everyone knows that does already exist as support from CMLS in that best practice. Just making sure that it is easy for, if someone's going to work with your MLS, they know who to call and what that contact information is. So we do have that resource. It is on that resource page that I did pull up, and I think Kelly will, or somebody, I don't know who's running the deck. I just know it's not me because I can't multitask that well. So there's the screen with the links to it and the recommendations that are on there. So if anybody wants that, I think that's recommendation 7 off the top of my head, but I won't swear to that one. And then also we do have, and the link is in the chat. And then also, I think there is a PDF of all of the recommendations if you don't already have that somewhere. If everybody hasn't done that, and one of my team can correct me if not, that we did have that as a PDF that you can get in and see all of the recommendations. And then also, I believe that NAR is asking for the feedback on this in the hub. So I don't know if anybody on the work group, Greg, if you know that answer, or Chris is the chair, where is NAR looking for the feedback specifically to the MLS standards recommendations?
So the recommendations that are coming forward to the MLS committee, both the standards and then our other motion that we have that we'll talk about later, probably the best thing that people can do is make sure they're getting involved with the forum. Monday the 9th in the morning is the MLS forum. So this is one of the first times that we're having the forum separate from the MLS meeting, but all the MLS committee members are invited to the forum, and that information will be reported back to the committee as well. So you can submit questions there. You can submit them on the hub, but I'm guessing not everybody's probably on the hub. So make sure you attend the forum and submit questions through that, so that can be brought forward, that discussion can be brought forward to the MLS committee for when they vote on this.
Can I add to that, Danae?
Absolutely.
So anybody that knows me knows that in a previous life, I was in the Army, military police, and our motto was of the troops, for the troops. This policy is really in that same mantra, of the troops, for the troops. That's why we had so many practitioners and people that are impacted by policy involved in that process. Specifically, sometimes there's a feeling, at least in the past, that policies are a top-down driven approach. These are organic requests in regards to standards that are coming from the industry. That's a significant difference from an approach standpoint. These are some of these recommendations, if you've taken the time to look at them, are kind of no-brainers. We say, well, of course, MLSs should require accurate data. That's kind of a no-brainer. Some of the other ones get into the weeds a little bit, and obviously there'll be an appropriate time to have that conversation, but none of these should be thought about from some kind of approach saying, well, these are being dictated to me. I think if you're in the industry and you see these things, a lot of these should resonate with you. And if not, the entire point is this process, we want to be transparent. And I think this group, we need recommendations from the industry. So if you see something that that you have some heartburn about, please let us know because we're going to want to discuss that. In order for these to be meaningful, they have to work for the industry.
I love that, Chris. And I would like to just follow that up over to Nicole and say, Nicole, this was the first time I had the opportunity to work with you on a committee or a work group, and I really appreciate it, enjoyed it. But I would ask you to share, and we've been asking that at CMLS of people getting involved and sharing, but what would be your recommendations and your feedback for anyone who wants to either get involved or share on these recommendations, or if they have ideas, like what's your advice to them, or how did you participate? Like, how are you getting your voice?
All right, so one of the things that I did want to ask quick for the last question that we spoke about, transparency was a huge discussion throughout our entire work group. And I know there was discussion of the creation of a web form to be able to get everybody's input throughout this whole, so it's not there yet, but that's something that maybe Rodney can speak to, I think is going to be coming in the near future, like just getting everybody's voice moving forward. I've been involved as a realtor prior to taking the exec job. So I was involved in committees at the state and national level on that aspect when I came in. And I just pretty much harass everybody with all my questions to, how do I learn more? How do I do better? How do I make things better for our subscribers in the MLS? And with that, like, I'm the first person to volunteer, saying, you know, if I'm not here having these conversations, then I have not much to say about it. So just read everything and get involved and ask the questions. They listen.
Awesome. And that's why I appreciated you in the work group, because sometimes people are on there and they don't speak up as much, but Nicole was sharing away and I loved it. So thank you. And then also this is also the other place. We want to give you all the opportunity. We're going to go to the breakouts here in just about another 10-15 minutes. Before we do that, before we switch over to the address piece, the other piece, or we're about to switch over to the address piece, but I just wanted to ask the panelists, is there anything to add on the MLS standards piece before we switch topics? Anybody have any other thoughts or things to share on this that they want our attendees to know today? Other than it's Friday. Woohoo!
And other than the fact that Mary Jo, who's not on the committee or the work group, we're not done yet. So the work group is going to continue its work, and there will be another presentation in the May timeframe.
I think this is, you know, there's a lot of great work here. I wish we had time to really dig into all 8 of those recommendations before we go into a work group, but I know that that's a real time buster for us today. But I think that, you know, when I read through them, I see just really three key things: keeping the data clean, data integrity, treating everyone the same, you know, as far as, you know, penalties and how you keep the data clean, you know, RESO and data transmission. All of these things are things we've been talking about for a long time. So I don't see anything shocking in there, as long as we don't get caught up in the minutia of you know, trying to take verbatim that our rules have to change to be exactly like this. If our rules are close, then we're in a good shape as far as penalties and warnings and reminders and all of that stuff. Because I think that's probably where a lot of the conversations are going to come is, you know, my MLS does it different, and why do I have to do this? So I think hopefully there'll be some good conversation on that later. That's the key piece of this that I can see head scratching happening.
And from a broker perspective, it's having that consistency from
Absolutely.
one MLS to the next, because most of us nowadays are in more than one MLS. And so you don't want to have one place where you can get away with whatever, and the next place you can't, or vice versa. It's that consistency.
And I think that's critical, Greg. I'm just thinking, you know, I'm looking through all these pages, you know, I probably would have to make minor changes to we already have all of this broken down, but there may be other MLSs that don't and haven't. So this could be a bigger lift for some than others. And so I would guess it's going to bring a lot of questions to Rodney and Renee when all of this passes. That's going to be the bigger administrative lift, I think, is kind of where I was going.
Mary Jo, you really hit on it. Think about it. There's certainly a third piece where there's policy that doesn't address some of it, but I'm a very basic, simple man. Think about it in this way. A lot of this deals with data in and data out. Data in and data out. And if you boil it down to the importance of the MLS, that's the significant role we have in organized real estate, is really helping control the data in and data out to ensure that it's a reliable product and commodity that brokers can really build their business around. So data in, data out.
I can say one more thing quick tonight. So when we were talking about all of this and the changes, and even the phase 2 of this process, which, you know, I'm excited for, a big part of the conversation was the resources that were going to be able to be made available around these recommendations from NAR for the MLSs. And I think that's going to be a big part of this for the smaller MLSs, is having one place to go to find the answers, to find examples, you know, and the time being spent on that, I think, is going to be super helpful for somebody that doesn't have a huge staff.
Well, and that's where our partnership between NAR and CMLS has been helpful. You know, you saw that on Clear Cooperation with some examples of policy. You've seen it on this, and I'm sure we'll continue to see it in the future.
I'm just going to say we were a little ahead of it because we already had one resource done for one of them.
Right.
So I'll take that a little bit.
There's a chat question today about maybe somebody could explain the rationale behind recommendation number 8. It wouldn't be me, but I just noticed that in there. So I didn't know if we wanted to try to address that.
Well, I think number 8 came up. This is regarding the fair housing. As a you know, with the current world that we're living in, and we're going through all this issues with fair housing as we were dealing with all these meetings, the question come up is, you know, are we doing everything we can MLS wise to make sure that we're not an impediment to fair housing, or that we're not unconsciously creating any issues? And so that's the group started having some good discussions on that, and what should we do, what can we do, and to help our subscribers and our participants in not creating a system that is somehow unfair or unbalanced.
We also had one other question in there about if the regional MLSs let their associations handle rules enforcements. Is that something we would answer here? Chris, I might hand that over to you as the chair of that group.
Well,
Or do we need to get an answer?
yeah, I think, again, I go back to the first statement that I made. This is about ensuring quality MLS, and that hopefully it's consistent. In the regional, the multi-regional MLS that I work in, it is centralized enforcement, so it's consistent. And I don't think that any MLS would ever want to put themselves in a situation where even if you delegated that to realtor associations, that it would be so different, because that means an inconsistent product for your brokers. That creates efficiency issues, right? So I'm not in that market, but again, the goal is to provide a level consistency that brokers can count on in regards to quality. So I'm not exactly addressing that, but I would hope that whatever that standard is, that whoever's enforcing it meets that bar, that threshold of consistency.
Janae, can I add to that? Because I think that's a really good question. And from we have 15 shareholders in Stellar MLS. And I know that Art and others have way more than that. And we centralized that enforcement. That is a task that we do in-house because of the concern of the interpretation of the rules by the shareholder associations or other things, or somebody saying, oh, well, if I go to this association, I can get away with that and I don't have to follow X or do Y or do Z. So I think if there isn't a regional that operates in this case, this is going to be a benefit for them, because now there will be standardization within their shareholders that they'll have to pass these guidelines on. So I think it will help lead to more consistency if somebody's outsourcing that to the shareholders.
And that's a good point to make, Mary Jo, if I may today. And also just say, as a regional MLS that is proactive in this already, and we commit an entire amount of, a tremendous amount of resources and hours into ensuring that policies are enforced. By every year, we talk to the staff about the importance of customer service. And I always say, this is our role as an MLS, and our role is to not be the DMV. We are not traffic court. We always give the member the benefit. This is why we exist. However, we don't want to be so bureaucratic that we lose that attachment to the everyday realtor. At the same token, it's really difficult, and I'm sure some of you have dealt with this. It's very difficult if you have some kind of overlapping geography with an MLS that doesn't do anything, and you put so much effort into ensuring that your compilation is accurate. It's easy to point the finger at the one who actually does the job and enforce policies to say they're the bad guy, right? It's mom and dad. Dad is the one that always tells me to don't do this and don't do that. And the other parent lets me do whatever I want. We want to get away from that. Again, this is about a level consistency for data accuracy. It's not about one organization being the bad guy and the other one not. This is about ensuring that the product itself is consistent. And sometimes you have to tell the member, no, you can't do it, right? So off my soapbox.
All right. And I am loving this conversation. I'm loving the questions coming in, and these are the perfect ones to go into our roundtables and why we're having these, so that we can start these questions and start to answer how do we address these and what do they look like going forward in advance of those meetings. So the two things, I just want to make sure you know, there is also an NAR meeting after this. And I just wanted to address and let you guys know, the reason that we did still have this one here is we wanted it to be MLS focused. I think the other meeting was open to a bigger audience, but this is specifically to the MLS audience is our target. And we really wanted you guys to have an opportunity to talk with each other. So there still is that one after this a little later today that I'd encourage you that from NAR. And then also, I think this is open information about, we are still going to facilitate the NAR roundtables that will also be in advance of the next meeting. So you'll have this opportunity to talk about it, go into the work groups, hear the NAR webinar later today, and then also next week you'll have another time to come back together and continue to talk about it, or other topics that might be. So anyways, we're just really trying hard to make sure that everybody has a time to come together, discuss it, talk about it, and figure out how we advance the industry. So I appreciate all of your participation. And with that, somebody did ask, I think, for the information. We'll try and get that out. If Renee or Rodney, if you guys are there, can post that. I think, oh, it is on there already. Yay, Monica, you're ahead of me. Thank you. And so with that, if we can go ahead to the next one, the recommendation for the address being required submitted. And so if we can do that, Greg or Art, if one of the two of you, Greg is the chair, and Art, I know you're on that committee. If one of the two of you, Kelly, I think we have a slide for that. If you can put that recommendation up, and then we'll spend about the next 10 minutes or so before we break into our roundtables to discuss these in more detail.
So this question was brought forward through a kind of a combination of a couple MLSs out in California. And the group had an interesting discussion. Ever since we passed clear cooperation, there's been a lot of nuances that have been brought up under that idea that really don't pertain directly to clear cooperation, but affect clear cooperation. And so the idea of this, the MLS has had a policy by where they could have a property that was what they called private, so it didn't have an address, didn't have any identification as to where the property was. And so we had a discussion along the lines of, you know, when we think about minimum standards for MLSs, and we think about all the complete and accurate data, when we think about what's going on with clear cooperation. And so when staff brought this forward, we decided to have as far as they had questions about it from these various MLSs, we decided to convene another meeting of the advisory board so that we could bring this, discuss it, and then see what direction the advisory board wanted to take and bring this forward. And in that meeting, we had presentations by both of the MLSs that were dealing with this directly. They had, oh shoot, I think we had at least 30 or 40 minutes between the two of them discussion, and which was very good, you know, to hear directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And by the way, the advisory board makeup is very similar to what we did with the work group on standards. And it's made up of a variety of brokers, large and small, from all different parts of the country, and a variety of MLSs from all different parts of the country, large and small again. And so we were able to have some very good and frank discussions. The call went on for over a couple of hours just on this one topic. And it was good because we had everybody had a chance to speak their opinions, and they were very diverse, and nobody's afraid to give their opinions in that group, that's for sure, which is what we like, because we always come out with something better than any one of us would have thought of at the beginning when you get all the input. So that's the basics. I think Art could speak to it too as well.
Yeah, Art, if you'd go ahead and share a little bit more, as I think you're the other member of that group. And Greg, I just have to laugh because as we were talking about it the other day, and you said it's definitely not the group of Yes, Greg. Like that group definitely digs in and they debate
the only time it's Yes, Greg is if I call on somebody and they say yes.
They're willing to share.
Yeah, this isn't, you know, and we have this misconception. I just get on, Chris had his soapbox for a minute, and I'll get on mine for just a second. It's amazing how we in this industry, when we're at the local level, our membership complains that, oh, that MLS board or that board of directors on the association doesn't listen to us. And you work hard to listen to them and to get diversity and to find out what's going on. And you still get accused of doing the top-down thing and not paying attention to the members. And we're also well-meaning at that end. And then we turn around and we look at our state or our national groups and we say the same thing about them. So it's kind of interesting how that plays out, but that's just human nature.
All right, Art, tell us a little bit more about the proposal and how the what you're thinking on it.
We also agree with Greg when he has a motion to dismiss, so that isn't too bad from that standpoint. I would agree with Greg. I think there was a lot of vigorous discussion you know, we had to dive into the details of what it was that was being asked and really consider coming off of all of the discussions about the clear cooperation policy and what the board of directors and the MLS committee had done the previous November. I know that there's a number of issues and things that I know that we'll be bringing to the table in the March timeframe deal with some of the things that are nicking away at the effectiveness of the clear cooperation policy. And this was brought to the committee, the subgroup, to really have a consideration of allowing an address to be hidden from the rest of the participants and subscribers within the multiple listing service. And we really had to dive into some of the basic tenets of what makes up a multiple listing service. And, you know, the tenets that they list here, the efficiency, transparency, and collaboration, really, you know, the thought process was, how collaborative can you be if you have a situation where key pieces of information are being hid from the rest of the subscribers and participants. We also went in fairly in depth into, there was quite a bit of conversation that occurred at the board of directors level in regards to fair housing. Even prior to the environment that we walked into, there were people that were walking up to the podium at the board of directors meeting that were talking about how pocket listings and what we were facing in the environment pre-CCP was affecting their clients. And one of the things that I know is a concern of mine is that in that breakdown of collaboration, were we opening up a door? Was it a slippery slope into, if this was allowed in multiple listing services, that it wasn't just a luxury environment. It wasn't just an environment where that information would be withheld because of privacy concerns, but might start being withheld because of other less honest reasons. And that was a big part of the discussion as well, as whether or not if we were going to make a statement that you could hide the property address from other subscribers and participants, if we weren't just opening the door to doing something that CCP was adamantly in favor of eliminating.
And along that discussion, you know, we're seeing this as this comes into play too with Office exclusive, and in a sense, the limiting the information might be along those lines. The advisory board is definitely going to be taking up some discussion now. Whether we come up with any grand motions or anything is hard to say this next year, but we're definitely going to have to take a look at Office exclusive and see where that's going and what the purpose is and how we can try to come up with guidance so that we don't go down that slope to where this is the back door to get around clear cooperation, or something else is the way to skirt other issues and cause more problems. So, and it was very back and forth discussion. It was really amazing because there's some real passion on both sides of the issue. And I think, as Art mentioned, it came down to not having a loophole for clear cooperation. It came down to having the best data possible, and it came down to consistency across marketplaces. And that's what I observed with the comments and how the voting went.
All right. Mary Jo, I'd like to just finish this piece up here. I'll ask for a couple closing before we go to the breakouts, but it's not being on the committee and looking at this now. Are we looking at it as are we having the right conversation about this? I was a little shocked to realize, because I have not memorized the MLS handbook yet. I'm not to Rodney's level, but to realize that it wasn't required in there. So I was a little shocked at that. But what are your thoughts on it? And is this how we need to be addressing it, as, you know, looking to ensure the core tenets of cooperation and transparent marketplace and what is an MLS, and especially considering fair housing as well? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll ask for some closing feedback from the group, and then we'll get into the fun breakout part.
Well, thanks, Janae. You know, what this brings to mind is even kind of like the last go around, where of course a broker should be entitled to his own data. I feel like what we're running into now are things, if it's not in the rules, then it's okay. And so now we're starting to put ourselves in the position of saying, okay, we have to clarify the rules. So, you know, if I think this is a good step. At first I was a little bit, you know, like, again, you know, why do we have to have this rule? It's kind of common sense. I think somebody said that earlier, but it does make a lot of sense. And I would put it, for me, the real key decision factor for me that puts me in favor of this is that whole transparency piece. And what Art mentioned too is, if not everybody has the best intentions, and I could see this could just blow up clear cooperation. If anybody can withhold an address for whatever reason, you know, if we have to treat everybody the same, then what's going to happen to the database? How accurate is it going to be? How, you know, all of those things, but mainly that transparency for the consumer. You know, listings out on the internet that don't have an address, what's the consumer going to think? And how, you know, they're going to want to know that, and the agent's not going to be able to help them. So I think that that's a real key thing about fair housing, as well as that keeping the clear cooperation alive internally inside the MLS, so that no agent or is thinking that another agent is deliberately not putting in the addresses just so that they can try to sell it. You know, it resurrects, to me, some of the concerns of clear cooperation. So I think it has to be solidified. But I do think it puts us in this position now that people are, if it doesn't say you can't do it in the rules, or that you have to do it, then now we have to start writing rules to clarify all that. So we could be going in a crazy circle with future rule changes. But this one, I think, for the exact reasons that you mentioned, for fair housing and for cooperation amongst our brokers, I think this is really important. Especially because they have options. There's office exclusives. The listings can, I'm sure, and all of our MLSs can be kept off the internet if they want to keep that internally. So I think there are ways to mitigate already built into the system for those special circumstances.
Great, thank you, Mary Jo. And then I would just ask from our panelists, any other closing thoughts, feedback to these policies, or great questions to spur conversation before we go into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm a part of some discussion groups across Facebook and in other areas. And if I see a regular thread, and I've been involved in this business for 23 years now, and I've heard this time and time again, is how dare NAR dictate what we at the local level should decide. Before you go down that road, you need to have the argument in front of the committee as a whole, and you need to have the argument of taking every M out of the MLS policy handbook, because you can't pick and choose which items that you make mandatory and which items that you don't make mandatory. That, in all honesty, was probably philosophically where Chris and John Coyle had to get us in the MLS standards work group, is what is the bright line of where NAR should intercede and where NAR should leave it to the local discretion. So there is a bright line there. I definitely believe what this proposal that is in front of you is very, very well inside the bright line. But I don't take a lot out of the argument that this is NAR overstepping and making something mandatory to those MLSs that are part of the NAR family. I think we all need to have that homogenous experience, as Mary Jo and Greg have said, for the benefit of our brokers and our agents.
Thank you, Art. Anybody else? Nicole, closing words of wisdom? No pressure.
I'm not sure about that on a Friday afternoon, but I'm excited. You know, I think this work group did an amazing job coming up with this as a start. The work is definitely not done. I'm looking forward to the continuing discussions. I was lucky enough to be appointed to the advisory board for next year as well. So I'm truly excited to see what we're going to be able to do to help move the industry forward. with the feedback from everybody once it gets out there.
And that's the big part here. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms. If any other, we're about to go into the magic button push. So I would say anybody who is not going to be in the work groups, you're missing out on excellent conversation. That's where the real fun is and the magic. I'd love to thank my panelists today for participating, sharing your thoughts, your insight is super helpful to shape the conversations and just share what happened and your perspective. But here we're going to go ahead and everything is on Zoom. We're going to ask that everybody keeps their cameras on because, again, love seeing faces and smiles, and it does make a big difference when you're in that room and talking and sharing. So if you'll put your cameras on, but please mute if you're not talking, and always the friendly reminder to unmute when you are talking. And then we do have facilitators in each one of the rooms. They've got some questions for you, but you can talk about these particular topics. Remember that there is the webinar later today. We posted that link in the chat, and then there will be the roundtables on the 5th of November as well, where you can come back and have some more conversation. As Greg said, they did change the forum to it before again, so you'll have that chance as well. So lots of opportunities to come talk about this, share, and ask those questions. So with that, I'm going to ask Betsy to go ahead and push the magic button, and you'll all be able to go into the roundtables and continue discussions. Thank you all for joining us and being part of the community. Appreciate it.